The newborn phase is hard. Most parents will tell you, hard is an understatement. In reality, you spend most of your time dirty and delirious, desperately trying to avoid nodding off into your third or fourth morning cup of coffee. You're already dealing with constant worry, inconsolable screaming, endless poopy diapers, and wondering what each stain on your shirt is. You have no hope of getting a full night's sleep. You hardly have time to eat, let alone cook. A shower suddenly becomes the height of luxury. What I'm trying to get at is, it's easy to believe your mind may be playing tricks on you when you see something in the shadows in the dead of night while you have a newborn. But this isn't my imagination, and I need to know if any other new parents have seen this too. Well before my due date, we set up the baby monitor. We left the monitor on at night in order to get used to the screen's persistent glow cutting through the darkness of our room. I'm a night owl, frequently staying up until 2 or 3 in the morning, so I spent many nights glancing at the screen and never noticed anything unusual. The same was true for the first few months of my daughter's life while she slept in the bassinet beside our bed. But on her first night alone in her room, I noticed a particularly dark spot in the corner that seemed to pulse, as if it were alive, as if it were breathing. I squinted. I zoomed the camera in. I even went into the room and peeked at the corner myself. I didn't find anything out of the ordinary until I glanced back down at the screen and saw that the spot had moved from the corner to the middle of the room and was now a distinct humanoid silhouette. And it was looking in my direction. Fear engulfed me immediately. I stared at the figure on the screen as it stared at me. I had trouble tearing my eyes away, frozen in terror, but knew I had to look up. I had to see it for myself. But when I looked up, nothing was there. I rushed over and scooped up my daughter, bringing her back to her bassinet in our room. And when I looked back at the monitor as I plugged it in, I noticed the figure was gone. What was still lingering was the chill that had been sent up my spine and an unshakable feeling that I was being watched. I spent the rest of the night staring at the door, as if I was waiting for someone to come barging through it. It was a week before my husband could convince me to let our daughter sleep in her room again. "You're tired, you're stressed, you probably just saw a shadow," he kept repeating. I finally gave in just to make him drop it. I spent the entire night sitting up in bed, eyes glued to the monitor, scanning constantly for pulsating shadows, but none showed up. After a few nights with no overnight visitors, I began to relax. After a few weeks, I started to believe that my husband must have been right. It must have been a figment of my imagination. But last night, I rolled over to take one last peek before going to sleep for the night, expecting to see my daughter sleeping in her crib. But she wasn't in her crib at all. She wasn't even in the room. The shadow was standing right over her empty cot. Its head snapped up in the direction of the camera, as if this thing was trying to look into it. To look at me. I immediately smacked my husband awake and shoved the monitor in front of his face. "Where's the baby?" I yelled as he rubbed his eyes, trying to come quickly back to consciousness. "What are you talking about?" He yawned, finally focusing on the monitor, eyes suddenly going wide and moving to scan my undoubtedly unhinged expression. "What's that thing?" he asked me, not waiting for the answer as he sprung out of bed, running into her room as I scanned every corner of ours, as if she could have magically teleported in here on her own. I didn't see her anywhere, so I followed my husband, hesitantly for some reason, and made my way to the nursery doorway, monitor in hand. On it, I could see my husband frantically searching high and low in the room, but more importantly, I could see the figure looming over his, each and every move, reaching out, trying to touch him, when my husband suddenly whipped around, panting, as if he expected someone to be there, and yet saw nothing. But I could see it. From the doorway, I glanced up at them, but instead of seeing my husband, I was met with the face of the thing, inches from my own, with deep black eyes staring into my soul itself. The skin was covered in boils, so full they could burst at any moment. Giant, jagged yellow teeth leaked drool over stretched, cracked lips. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. It opened its mouth, and I expected my ears to be met with a disgusting gurgling, but instead, a sweeping crescendo of infant cries engulfed me. Not just one infant, but many, all screeching in perfect harmony, transfixing me with their heart-shattering sounds. The screams became an all-encompassing roar, growing louder and louder, before suddenly stopping altogether, the beast vanishing right before my eyes. I then heard a quieter, familiar cry from my daughter's crib. She lay there, squirming a bit, beginning to fuss, and my husband and I exchanged confused looks before he picked her up and brought her back to our room. I don't think I'll ever be letting her sleep in that room again. The thing that's really bothering me, though, is that something feels just the slightest bit off about my daughter. Like she's changed in some way. Has anyone ever encountered a monster like this? After quitting my factory job and having trouble finding a job worth the money, I came across a job advertisement in the local town paper. Hiring, night shift security guard, no experience needed. Call Maurice at phone number listed. I called the number and was greeted by an elderly man. He informed me to come in the next day and he would show me around and fill me in. So I'm hired? Yeah, kid. I went in the next day and showed up for the interview about 15 minutes early. If you aren't early, you're late. I was informed to go to a side door and where the security office was, so I wouldn't be interfering with those at the funeral home who were mourning a loved one. A short man with wrinkles and a nice and tight white hair, cut wearing a security uniform, was smiling at me. He had a white caterpillar above his lip, stained slightly with black coffee he was sipping on. You must be Conway. Are you named after the singer? Probably. My mom sure loves old country music. Don't you call that old? He let out a chuckle and reached his frail hands out to me. I shook his and didn't expect it to be as firm as it was. They put me over the hiring process, and you were the first to put in, so I believe in giving chances. I sure appreciate it. Yes, sir. You'll be working a Monday through Friday, from 11 to 7 p.m. He went through the pay, which was exactly what I was making in the factory. He also explained that the weekend crew guys were only 2 of them, but they worked 12-hour shifts and filled me in their names, Jacob and Robert. The evening guy is Jackson. You may have to fill in for them. He also told me I could have day shift when he is dead and cold. He don't want to retire until he has to. I've had this job since I was about your age. It's a good job. He filled me in on how to watch the cameras, answer a phone call, though it wouldn't happen much at night unless it was a prank call. He also told me what times I should patrol the area. The biggest rule is to respect the dead. I wasn't sure what he meant by it. Our last guy we had was an old coot that kicked the bucket. May he rest in peace. We shook hands on my way out, and he offered one more piece of advice. I understand at nighttime it may be a little scary. I've worked a few shifts. You're the only person that will be here, and I get that. You may get the heebie-jeebies, but respect the dead and don't let anybody in under any circumstance. I got my keys, and so do the other guys. I felt excited coming in on my first night. Jackson let me in and handed me my new badge. I offered him a donut as I settled in the office, and he left. I checked the camera screen while sipping on my coffee. I didn't have any areas I was supposed to check for another hour, and nothing was going on. I brought my iPad and put Seinfeld on to kill time. Maurice said there wouldn't be any issues with killing time as long as it didn't interfere with the job. 2 hours have gone by, and I walked the halls with my issued flashlight, and then I heard a knock at the front door. I scooted back to the office and seen that it was Maurice knocking. The knocking became a banging. He was wearing street clothes. Conway, open up, kid. I need in. I'll walk over to the door and speak through it. What can I do for you? Listen, I need in. I forgot my medication. What medication? That doesn't matter, but I need in. Don't you have your keys on you? Keys? No, I forgot them. I remembered that he had his office key attached to his key ring that also held ones for his home, truck, and other things. How did you get here? In my vehicle. What color is your car? What? I said, what color is your car? Black. You don't drive a car. You have a red truck. He began banging on the door, and his voice became much, much deeper and distorted. Let me in this fucking door so I can get my medication, or I'll fire your ass. I turned around and ran back to the office and tried to tune the noise out. He looked up at the camera and had a very wild smile. Smart boy. He turned around and walked off. Hours passed, and it's about time I go walk in the area where the dead bodies are kept in lockers. I knew it was going to smell like cleaning supplies and be cold. I put on my issued jacket. I glanced at the camera down there and froze in place. There were people standing in the area, just standing around and talking. If I would have been thinking, I would have called the cops. But who was also to say that the cops coming were actually law enforcement and not whatever the hell I just witnessed? I ran down to the area with my flashlight swinging as a light war mechanically moving. Left, right, left, right. I opened the door and seen lockers open and a group of dead people standing and having conversation. One turned to me. Hello there. That's the last thing I remembered. I woke up shortly after and the dead were standing around me. It was scary, but yet heartbreaking. Here stood someone's grandfather, someone who died by suicide, some others, and one that looked butchered badly. What the hell is happening? The grandpa spoke up. I found a note left on this table, and it explains we're gonna be alive for another 10 minutes or so. Then we go back in our lockers. What? Beats me. I looked at the lady that was butchered. Her throat was cut, stab marks through her body that made her sundress stain crimson. What happened to you? Someone broke in my home and did this. Do you know who it was? I don't, but I want them to suffer the way I did. She began describing the man having dark and short hair, but he also had a snake tattooed on his arm. He also had a prison neck tattoo that she didn't understand what it was. The others stood around and listening. They began mumbling about their lives and enjoying their last bit of time. 4 a.m. pops up in my watch, and they all go back in their locker as if their legs were forcing them to. I considered making a run and leaving. I checked the camera to make sure that no one's at the front door, but it didn't feel worth the risk. I finished the shift. As soon as it became 7 on the dot, Maurice opened up with his keys and patted me on the back. He was sipping from a cup of coffee. Okay, kid, let's talk about all this. I'll keep you guys updated as quickly as I can. I've always been a night owl, usually finding myself wide awake well past midnight. It's a habit I've carried since my college days, where late-night study sessions were the norm, and it's never really left me. After graduating, I moved to Los Angeles for a job, hoping the city's endless energy would suit my nocturnal lifestyle. But despite the time that's passed, I'm still not used to everything. The sprawling neighborhoods and the constant noise. My initial plan was to move in with my parents, but we had a falling out just before my move. The argument stemmed from my grandmother's will. When she passed, I was left out entirely, while my parents inherited everything. Feeling betrayed and resentful, I decided I couldn't live under their roof. With limited options and time running out, I had to settle for a crummy apartment in the shadier part of town. My apartment overlooks one of the busier streets in the area, so I've become quite accustomed to the sounds of traffic at all hours. The constant hum of engines and distant sirens have become a kind of white noise that usually lulls me to sleep. However, something strange has been happening lately that's left me unable to sleep. It started a few weeks ago. I'd be up late, reading or watching TV, and I'd hear the buses going by. Normally, the last bus in our town runs until 11 p.m., but recently, I've been hearing buses rumble by well past that time. At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe the city extended the hours or added a new route. But curiosity got the better of me. One night, around 1 a.m., I got the courage to peek out of my window. The streets were quiet, almost eerily so, and the air was heavy with that peculiar stillness only found in the dead of night. As I scanned the street, I saw it, a bus idling at the stop on the corner, its interior lights flickering dimly. I watched for a few minutes, waiting to see if anyone would get on or off, but the bus just sat there. The sight left me unsettled, but I couldn't muster the nerve to go outside. Over the next few nights, the bus kept appearing at the same time, idling at the same spot. Each time, I would watch from my window, my curiosity and unease growing with every sighting. Finally, one night, I decided enough was enough. I threw on a jacket and headed downstairs. The streets were just as silent and still as before, amplifying the sense of dread that had been building inside me. As I reached the corner of my block, I saw the bus again, its lights still flickering, and I knew I had to find out what was going on. Approaching the bus, I took a closer look. It looked like a standard city bus. Nothing about it screamed unusual or out of place. Its exterior was weathered, the paint chipped and peeling in spots, but otherwise, it seemed like any other bus. My heart pounded as I hesitated, standing just outside the door. The door creaked open on rusty hinges, the sound piercing the stillness of the night and sending a shiver down my spine. Without hesitation, I climbed aboard, dropping an old worn dollar bill into the box as I made my way to the back of the bus. The driver, a shadowy figure in a worn uniform, didn't speak or even look at me, just stared straight ahead as if I didn't exist. I settled into one of the seats near the rear, feeling a sense of unease creeping over me. The bus interior was dimly lit, with flickering lights casting eerie shadows on the worn, cracked seats. The air smelled faintly of mildew and old leather, mixing with the metallic scent of rust. Graffiti covered the walls and the backs of seats, some of it recent, some of it old and faded. I noticed a few seats with stuffing spilling out, torn from years of use and neglect. The windows were grimy, and cobwebs clung to the corners, swaying slightly with the motion of the bus. The floor was littered with old ticket stubs, wrappers, and other debris, adding to the sense of decay and abandonment. As the bus started moving, I glanced out the window, expecting to see familiar streets. Instead, the scenery quickly changed to a desolate area filled with old warehouses and empty roads. The warehouses were dilapidated, their windows broken, and walls covered in graffiti. Rusted machinery and abandoned vehicles littered the grounds, creating an eerie, post-apocalyptic landscape. My heart began to race, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I looked around, noticing the eerie emptiness outside. Not a single car or person in sight. I pulled out my phone, hoping to check my location, but there was no signal. Oddly enough, I noticed the battery was at 2%, even though it had been fully charged when I left. The screen flickered uselessly before going dark. Panic surged through me as I realized something was terribly wrong. Desperate, I tried to walk toward the front of the bus, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. Each step was a struggle, my movements slow and labored. I reached out to steady myself, my fingers brushing against the cold, worn metal of the seats. The air inside felt heavy, as if it were pressing down on me, making it even harder to move. "What's going on?" I demanded, my voice trembling. But the driver remained silent, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, completely unresponsive. His face was partially obscured by the dim light, giving him an almost ghostly appearance. I fumbled for the door, trying to push it open with all my might, but it wouldn't budge. Panic rising, I glanced around and spotted the emergency release lever. I grabbed it, yanking hard, but nothing happened. The lever felt rusted, stuck in place, as if it hadn't been used in years. I pounded on the window, hoping to attract someone's attention, but the streets outside were deserted, the buildings looming like silent sentinels in the dark. As I continued to struggle, I noticed the bus seemed to be moving faster, the scenery outside blurring into a nightmarish haze. The desolation and decay of the warehouses gave way to an even more unsettling landscape, one that seemed to shift and change with each passing second. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat of fear and desperation. Desperate, I turned back to the driver, only to find the seat empty. My stomach dropped, and panic washed over me like a tidal wave. Sweat started to bead on my forehead as my breath came in shallow, rapid gasps. The reality of the situation hit me hard, and I felt a cold dread creeping up my spine. I looked around frantically, my eyes darting to the windows and the door, seeking any way out. The windows were clouded with grime, and the door remained stubbornly shut. I noticed the dashboard covered in strange, glowing symbols that I couldn't understand. The symbols pulsed with an unnatural light, casting eerie shadows on the cracked vinyl of the driver's seat. The sight of them made my skin crawl, a deep sense of unease settling in my gut. Desperation mounting, I pressed buttons and pulled levers, hoping to stop the bus or open the doors, but nothing worked. Each button I pressed gave a faint, unresponsive click, and the levers felt stiff and immovable under my trembling fingers. My heart pounded louder with each passing second, the fear gripping me tighter. The symbols on the dashboard seemed to glow brighter, as if mocking my futile attempts to escape. My mind raced, filled with 1,000 thoughts, and none at all. I was trapped, and the bus hurtled forward into the unknown, carrying me with it. I could feel the oppressive weight of the situation pressing down on me, suffocating me with its intensity. Every creak of the bus, every flicker of the lights, only served to heighten my terror. Suddenly, I felt a blunt force hit the back of my head. Pain exploded in my skull, and my vision blurred. I tried to stay conscious, but the darkness quickly swallowed me. It felt like being submerged in a black, icy sea, the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. I woke up with a start, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, I couldn't move, the terror of the dream still gripping me. The memory of the bus and its ominous interior flashed through my mind, mixing with the lingering pain in my head. Slowly, I glanced around, disoriented, before realizing I was safe in my own bed. The familiar sight of my room provided some comfort, but the remnants of fear lingered like a haunting shadow. As I sat up, I felt something crumpled in my hand. Pulling it out, I found a dollar bill, the same one I had mechanically dropped into the fare box on the bus. Its edges were creased and the surface slightly worn, as if it had seen many hands before mine. But what froze my blood was the message scrawled across it in shaky handwriting. "Next time you won't wake up." The words seemed to burn into the paper, each letter a twisted promise of something malevolent lurking just beyond my perception. Fear clenched at my heart as I stared at the words, the memory of the nightmare still fresh in my mind. Had it all been just a dream? I turned the dollar bill over in my hands, the chilling message glaring up at me. A shiver ran through me. I had to know, was there really something sinister at play, or was my mind simply playing tricks on me? As the days passed, the memory of the nightmare lingered, haunting me like a shadow. I found myself avoiding the late-night streets, the once familiar sounds now tinged with an unsettling edge. The city's nocturnal symphony of distant sirens and the hum of traffic became a haunting backdrop to my paranoia. No matter how hard I tried to distract myself, the image of that empty bus and the chilling message on the dollar bill remained etched in my mind like a sinister graffiti. Then, one night, as I lay awake in bed, the silence was shattered by a distant rumble. The low growl of an engine, unmistakably the sound of a bus pulling up to the stop outside my window. My heart froze in my chest as I listened, the fear creeping back in like an unwelcome specter.